All right, so we're diving into hydrogen. This stuff is everywhere these days, but what's the deal? Like, where did this whole hydrogen hype start?
Well, it might surprise you to learn just how far back this whole hydrogen thing goes.
Okay.
We're talking like way back early 20th century kind of stuff.
Seriously.
Yeah, 1923, there's this British scientist, J.B.S. Haldane, and get this, he's already talking about using wind power to make hydrogen.
No way. That's before, like, wind turbines were even a thing, right?
Pretty much. This guy was way ahead of his time. He was all about ditching fossil fuels, going green, decentralizing energy production. All these ideas that are super hot right now.
Like he predicted the future of energy or something.
It's really incredible when you think about it. And you know what's even crazier?
What?
It took like a major global energy crisis for people to really start paying attention to these ideas.
You're talking about the oil shocks back in the 70s.
Exactly. Suddenly, everyone's scrambling, looking for alternatives to oil, and hydrogen is right there, waiting in the wings.
It's like, hey, remember that hydrogen thing? Maybe we should have listened to that Haldane guy.
Right, and that's when you see this surge of interest in hydrogen. Governments are putting money into research, scientists are digging deeper.
And it's not just, some dry research happening in a lab. This is when you get these really charismatic figures like, remember John Bockris?
Oh, absolutely. The hydrogen economy guy.
Yeah. He was like the ultimate hydrogen hype man.
Yeah.
Wasn't he driving around in a hydrogen-powered car or something?
I think it was more like a modified car with a hydrogen engine. But yeah, he was all about showing people the potential of hydrogen, not just talking about it in a boring scientific way.
Totally. He understood that to get people excited about something new, you got to put on a show. So we've got these early visionaries like Haldane planting the seeds. Then the oil crisis happens and suddenly those seeds start to sprout. But how do we go from this like fringe idea to actually putting hydrogen to work in the real world?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
So how do we go from this like fringe idea to actually putting hydrogen to work in the real world?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. When you think about hydrogen, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Cars.
Yeah.
Rockets. I don't know, those hydrogen fuel cell buses I saw during the Olympics.
You're right. Transportation is a big one. And the history of hydrogen vehicles goes way further back than you might think.
Okay, now you've got me curious. How far back are we talking?
Try the early 1800s, like horse and buggy times.
Get out. Seriously.
Yeah. This Swiss inventor, Francois Isaac de Rivaz, he built an internal combustion engine that ran on hydrogen. 1807.
Wow. So this idea has been kicking around for centuries.
Pretty much. Of course, his engine wasn't winning any races against, actual horses back then.
Right, I can imagine. But still, to think that someone was already tinkering with hydrogen engines back then, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. But then, you know how it goes. Oil enters the picture.
Yeah, cheap, plentiful oil. Kind of throws a wrench in the whole hydrogen thing, huh?
Exactly. But that didn't stop everyone. In the 1930s, there's this German engineer, Rudolf Aron, and he's running buses and trucks on hydrogen.
No way. Hydrogen buses in the 1930s. I had no idea.
It's true. But yeah, cheap oil kind of put the brakes on hydrogen's momentum for a while. It wasn't until the mid-20th century with the development of, drum roll please, the fuel cell.
On the fuel cell, now we're talking. That feels like a real game changer. It's like suddenly we're not just talking about burning hydrogen, we're talking about converting it directly into electricity.
Exactly. The fuel cell really is a game changer. Specifically, the proton exchange membrane fuel cell, or PE fuel cell, that's the one that's really taken off.
PE fuel cell. Got it. And didn't, NASA use fuel cells in their spacecraft way back when?
They did. Fuel cells provided electricity and even drinking water for those early space missions. It was a perfect application for the technology.
Right, because in space, efficiency and reliability are everything.
Exactly. And what works in space often finds its way down to Earth eventually.
Speaking of which, weren't there some car companies experimenting with fuel cell vehicles in the 90s?
Absolutely. That's when you start to see companies like Mercedes-Benz and Toyota really investing in fuel cell technology.
Right. The Mercedes-Benz NEC car. Wasn't that one of the first fuel cell cars?
It was one of the early prototypes, definitely a head-turner. And Toyota had the RAV4 EV, one of the first commercially available fuel cell vehicles.
Cool. So fuel cell vehicles are out in the real world by the 90s. What happened next? Why didn't we all switch to hydrogen cars then?
Well, there were some bumps in the road.
Like what?
Well, for starters, those early fuel cell cars, they were expensive, like really expensive.
Oof. Yeah, that's always a tough sell.
And then there was the whole infrastructure problem.
Ah, right, the chicken and egg thing.
Exactly. You need enough cars on the road to justify building refueling stations, but people won't buy the cars if there's nowhere to refuel them.
It's a classic dilemma. So how do you break free from that cycle?
It takes a bold vision and a whole lot of investment. And that's where a country like Japan really took the lead.
Japan's been all in on hydrogen for a while now, right?
Absolutely. They were one of the first countries to really embrace hydrogen as a key part of their energy future. They invested heavily in research and development. They provided incentives for people to buy fuel cell vehicles, and they started building those refueling stations.
And they made a big splash with those hydrogen buses during the 2020 Olympics, right?
Exactly. Those buses were a powerful symbol of Japan's commitment to hydrogen. And it wasn't just for show. They've continued to expand their hydrogen infrastructure with the goal of having thousands of fuel cell vehicles on the road in the coming years.
It's really impressive to see a country making that kind of commitment. But Japan isn't the only one, right? What about other parts of the world?
Europe's been making big moves too. They've got this ambitious plan called the hydrogen backbone. Basically, they want to create this massive network of pipelines to transport hydrogen all across the continent.
A pipeline network just for hydrogen? That's wild.
I know, right? And it's not just about cars anymore. We're starting to see hydrogen power all sorts of things. Trucks, trains, buses, even ships.
Hold on. Hydrogen-powered ships. That sounds incredible. I mean, those massive cargo ships are some of the biggest polluters out there.
I know. It's still early days, but the potential is huge. There's actually a company in Switzerland that's building these massive cargo ships designed to run entirely on liquid hydrogen.
Wow. Liquid hydrogen. That sounds intense.
It is, but it's also incredibly energy dense, which makes it a great fuel for long-distance shipping. Imagine a world where those giant cargo ships crisscrossing the oceans aren't spewing out tons of emissions.
It's hard to even imagine. So what's next? Where else can hydrogen take us? So we've got cars, trucks, planes, even giant cargo ships running on hydrogen. But what about those massive industries that rely so heavily on fossil fuels? Can hydrogen play a role there too?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, you might be surprised to learn that a lot of industries already use hydrogen in their processes.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. The catch is that most of this hydrogen is currently made using fossil fuels, so it's not exactly clean.
Ah, I see. So it's like a dirty secret of these industries.
Kind of, yeah. But that's where green hydrogen comes in. That's hydrogen produced using renewable energy sources like wind and solar. And that's a game changer for these heavy industries.
Makes sense. Swap out the dirty hydrogen for the clean stuff. But where do you even start? Like take steelmaking, for example. I know that's a huge industry and it's a major polluter.
You're right, steelmaking is a huge source of emissions. But there's a really cool project in Sweden called H-Hybrid. They're using green hydrogen to replace coal in the steelmaking process.
H-Hybrid. That name rings a bell.
It stands for Hydrogen Breakthrough Iron Making Technology. Catchy, right?
Well, I guess it gets the point across.
The cool thing is they've actually produced fossil-free steel using this technology.
No way. So it's not just like a theory anymore. It actually works.
It works, and it has the potential to completely transform the steel industry.
Now that's what I'm talking about. Real-world solutions, not just futuristic dreams. What other industries are ripe for a green hydrogen makeover?
Well, how about agriculture?
Agriculture. Okay, now you've got me really intrigued.
So green hydrogen can be used to make green ammonia.
Green ammonia.
Which is a key ingredient in fertilizer. And companies like Yara International are already building plants to produce it using renewable energy and green hydrogen.
So we're talking about a more sustainable way to feed the world. That's amazing. Green steel, green fertilizer. Is there anything green hydrogen can't do?
Well, we're not quite there yet, but it can even help decarbonize those hard-to-electrify sectors like aviation and shipping.
Wait, really? How so?
Green hydrogen can be used to create carbon-neutral fuels, sometimes called e-fuels.
E-fuels, never heard of those.
They can be used in existing engines and infrastructure. So you could potentially have planes and ships running on these carbon-neutral fuels.
Wow. So we've got cars, trucks, planes, even giant ships potentially running on green hydrogen. What about the electricity grid itself? Can hydrogen help us there too?
Absolutely. Remember those power-to-gas systems we were talking about?
The ones that can store energy from renewables as hydrogen.
Yep. That stored hydrogen can be converted back into electricity using fuel cells or hydrogen power plants, which are like natural gas plants, but they burn hydrogen instead.
So it's like a giant battery for the electricity grid.
Exactly. And there are even some existing power plants that are transitioning from coal to hydrogen. So the technology is already being implemented.
This is amazing. It really seems like hydrogen has the potential to completely revolutionize our energy system. But it can't be all smooth sailing, right? There must be some challenges.
You're right. The biggest challenge right now is cost. Green hydrogen is still more expensive to produce than hydrogen made from fossil fuels. But as the technology scales up, the cost is coming down.
Okay, so the price needs to drop. What else needs to happen to make this green hydrogen dream a reality?
Infrastructure. We need pipelines to transport the hydrogen, storage facilities, and of course, more refueling stations for those hydrogen cars.
Yeah.
And then there's the public perception hurdle. Some people are still unsure about hydrogen, so education is key.
So we've got a ways to go, but it sounds like we're on the right track. Green hydrogen could be a game changer, and who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to develop the next big breakthrough. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of hydrogen. It's definitely given us a lot to think about.